It was exactly 7:42 in the morning when there was a knock on my apartment door. I was still standing among my moving boxes. The coffee maker hadn't even been unpacked yet. I picked up my phone, and on the screen was a text message from my mother, Margaret. It read, "Don't bring up that job title at Thanksgiving dinner. It's an embarrassment." I stood frozen on the floor, box cutter in hand, and suddenly remembered the day she kicked me out of the house. I was 22 back then, fresh out of college, and had just landed an entry-level audit clerk job in accounting. That night at the dining table, my mother slammed my offer letter in front of me and said this wasn't a career, it was just drowning in paperwork. She told me Derek was building a business, that he was going to do something real, and I would just be crunching numbers for the rest of my life. That night, my belongings were packed into 2 suitcases, and I walked out of that house in Oak Cliff where I had grown up. 12 years have passed. I am now a Senior Internal Auditor at Prescott Financial Group in downtown Dallas. My job is to find lies in files, in the very places where people think no one is looking. And this morning, staring at that message, I had no idea that next week, a job application file was going to land on my desk bearing the name Derek Hollister. When Derek defaulted on an $18,500 loan for his first real estate venture, the call came to me, not to Catherine the person, but to my old bank account, because my mother never bothered to take my name off the joint account. I paid the money. No complaints, no questions asked. When my mother's Medicare paperwork got tangled up and she got a notice for missing 2 months of premiums, I was the one who stood in line 3 times at the Dallas County Social Security office to sort it out. I never got a thank you. That was my way. I never raised my voice, never slammed a door. I was the daughter who reminded them of the property tax deadline every January, who helped repair Derek's battered credit score after every failed business idea. I used to think maybe this was how I could prove that that night, the night of the offer letter, was a mistake. But nothing changed. Every Thanksgiving, my mother would drop the same line. "Your brother works in the real world, you just look at files." I never talked back. An auditor's greatest strength is exactly that. She doesn't argue, she just keeps records. And I did keep records. Of everything. Every date. Every signature. I picked up this habit right from my first job, when I started as a junior clerk at a small accounting firm in Dallas. The pay was modest, $32,000 a year, and the office was on the 3rd floor of an old building where the smell of printer toner constantly hung in the air. On my desk sat a stapler, a red ink pad, and an endless stack of files. I loved the job from the very beginning because it left no room for lies. A number either matches up, or it doesn't. A signature is either on the actual date, or it's not. I took night classes, passed the Certified Internal Auditor exam, and by the age of 26, I landed an interview at Prescott Financial Group. Prescott was in one of those downtown Dallas buildings with marble floors in the lobby and a security guard who wouldn't let you in without checking your name badge. I got a spot in the compliance department, cross-checking vendor contracts and employee background files. I started catching every tiny discrepancy with such precision that within 3 years, I was promoted to senior auditor. I never told anyone about my mother. I never mentioned that on the day I signed my first promotion letter, I tried calling her that night, and she didn't pick up. I just closed the file and showed up at the office the next morning. This had become my life. Quiet, organized, and immaculate. Everything in its place. Every document in its folder. Little did I know that this very habit, this meticulousness, would one day lead my mother's other child right to my office door. I didn't know it then, but before that, another memorable conversation comes to mind. The last major conversation I had with my mother. It was 3 years ago, on a Sunday evening at exactly 6:19 p.m., when I went to the house in Oak Cliff to celebrate her birthday. The dining table was laid out with the same old yellow tablecloth I remembered from my childhood. My mother hadn't set a plate for me because Derek was bringing his girlfriend along and there was only room for 4 at the table. I didn't say a word. I just stood in the kitchen and ate my food. Later, as Derek was pitching his latest business idea, some food truck franchise he'd sunk his savings into, along with my mother's retirement fund, I gently suggested that maybe he should draft a business plan document first. My mother glared at me and said, "You always turn everything into paperwork, Catherine. Some people take risks. Some people just keep score. Derek is a real son. He builds things. You just count numbers." I put my plate in the kitchen sink, grabbed my coat, and walked out without saying a word. After that night, I never set foot in that house again. But I kept calling, kept paying the bills, kept reminding them of tax deadlines. Keeping the peace had become second nature to me, and that habit stayed with me right until that Tuesday morning when my assistant, Priya, dropped a new file on my desk. It was 10:05 a.m., and the morning sun over downtown Dallas was streaming through the 6th-floor windows of Prescott, glaring right onto my screen. The file was labeled New Hire Background Verification, Position, Regional Accounts Manager. I set down my coffee mug and opened the file. The first page was a standard employment application, and in the name box it read, Derek James Hollister. I stared at the screen for a few seconds. It wasn't a mistake. The date of birth matched. The last 4 digits of the Social Security number were exactly the ones I remembered from that Medicare fiasco. I closed the file, opened it again, and read the next page. His resume stated he had been doing freelance consulting for the past 3 years, which was code for the fact that the food truck franchise and the 2 ventures after it had gone belly up. My job was clear-cut. Audit every new hire's background file, cross-verify their past employment records, credit history, and any legal red flags before it went in front of the final hiring committee. It landed on my desk because this was my department, my responsibility. I jotted down a note on my desk calendar, and then I did what I always did. I moved the file to a secure folder and started digging deep. Only this time, not just for professional reasons, but also because I needed to know exactly how Derek ended up at this door. I looked at the timeline of his application in Prescott's HR system. He had found the job through a regional job fair on LinkedIn. No special connections, no referrals. It was just a coincidence, or maybe something more than a coincidence, because Prescott was one of the very few firms in the Dallas metro area still aggressively hiring for the regional accounts manager position. The interview was scheduled for Thursday afternoon at 2:15 p.m. I was called to sit on the panel, as my presence was mandatory for compliance sign-off. I put on my blazer, the same navy blue one I wore for every major interview, and headed to Conference Room C, where the previous quarter's performance charts were still hanging on the walls. When Derek walked in, he didn't recognize me. I was his sister, sure, but not the Catherine from 10 years ago, who used to sit quietly in the corner of the house. My hair was cut short now. I wore glasses, and my seat was at the far end of the table where the light didn't hit my face directly. He spun his story, how he'd been doing freelance consulting for 3 years, how he was now looking for stability. His voice carried that same old confidence I had always remembered, the kind of confidence that never wavered under questioning. I wrote just one line on my notepad. Verify previous business entity filings. Full tax ID cross-check required. Writing that line brought me no joy, nor any anger. I just remembered my job. After the interview, I went back to my desk and pulled the files on Derek's 3 past business entities, the food truck franchise LLC, a home renovation consulting venture, and a short-lived real estate flipping partnership. All 3 had one thing in common. My mother's name was listed as a co-signer or guarantor on every single one. She had put her home equity on the line for Derek 3 times over. I already knew all this, but seeing it in the files is different. It's not just a memory, it's on the record. Then, in the 3rd file, I found the document I had forgotten even existed. A limited power of attorney that my mother had signed 15 years ago when I was 18 and still in high school. It granted both Derek and me limited authority over certain financial decisions regarding family property once we both turned 18, so that if she was ever incapacitated, we could make decisions together. That document had never been revoked. The notary's seal that certified it was valid for a 4-year term under Texas law, and that term had expired 11 years ago. This meant that, technically, the document was now in a legally defective state, neither fully valid nor formally annulled. I slowly closed the file, and for the first time, I felt that maybe this stack of paper wasn't just the past. That thought lingered in my mind all week. I dusted off my compliance textbooks, looking up the sections of the Texas Estates Code that dictate the terms and validity of a power of attorney. I discovered that even though the document was technically challengeable due to an expired notary seal, sitting in the file undisputed for 15 years had created an entirely different kind of headache. Since the document was never formally revoked, it still showed up as an active red flag in any financial institution or employer background check. And that was exactly where my job came in. According to Prescott's hiring policy, if a candidate has an unresolved legal filing or an unrevoked power of attorney document to their name, full clarity is mandatory before final approval. At 3:08 p.m. on Thursday, I was sitting in the compliance board meeting where I had to present my findings to the hiring committee. I didn't name names. I showed no emotion. I simply said, "There is an unresolved legal document in the candidate's financial background, which makes it necessary to put the approval on hold until full verification is completed." The committee nodded and the file was put on hold. No one knew that this wasn't just office politics. It was a 15-year-old secret about to blow wide open the following week. Derek found out the next Monday at 9:24 in the morning when he received a formal email from Prescott's HR department stating that his application was temporarily on hold due to an unresolved legal document in his background check. The email included a contact number for the compliance department, along with the case number PFG-2219. Derek made the call, and reception transferred him to my extension. When I picked up and stated my name, Catherine Reed, Senior Compliance Auditor, there was a few seconds of dead silence. Then his voice came through, soft and dripping with disbelief. "Kathy, is that you?" I answered in an absolutely calm tone. "Yes, Derek, it's me." I felt no need to justify anything to him. I simply explained that a limited power of attorney signed 15 years ago was still sitting in active status on the records, and until it was formally resolved, no financial institution could hire him. He asked, "So what do I have to do?" I told him, "You and Mom will have to go together and file a newly notarized revocation document at the county clerk's office with both of your signatures." That evening, my mother called. At 6:42 p.m., she didn't apologize. She just asked, "You did this on purpose, didn't you? Just to force us to come crawling to you?" I replied, "No, Mom. I just did my job. The very job you always thought was worthless." A long silence hung over the line, and in that silence, for the first time, I felt like it was finally dawning on her. But I was in no rush. The following week, my mother and Derek both showed up at the Dallas County Clerk's office to sign the new revocation document. I refused to go. It wasn't my job. It was their paperwork, and they had to finish it themselves. 3 weeks later, Derek's file cleared, but not at Prescott. The hiring committee had already offered the position to another candidate. When he called me for the last time, there was no anger in his voice, just sheer exhaustion. He asked, "Did you do all this just to teach me a lesson?" I said, "No, Derek. I just did my job. The same job that was once called a disgrace in that house. My mother never apologized to me again, but the last time she called, she asked, "Were you never angry? In all these years? Not even once?" I replied, "I wasn't angry, Mom. I just kept the records." Until the records told their own story. Today, as I look out over the Dallas skyline from the 6th floor of Prescott, watching the evening light wash over the buildings, I don't feel any sense of victory. I just realize that staying quiet for years, cleaning up everyone else's messes, that wasn't peace. It was just a toll I was paying without even knowing it. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe to Storyhaven Daily. And remember, keeping the peace isn't peace. It's just paying the rent.